This meeting of the Anderson Township Board of Zoning Appeals is hereby called to order. This board was established pursuant to Section 519.13 of the Ohio Revised Code by the Anderson Township trustees to provide administrative relief to any person or entity adversely affected by the Anderson Township zoning resolution. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Mr. Nye,
Present.
Mr. Haber,
Present.
Mr. Halpin,
Here.
Mr. Nasilevich,
Here.
Mr. Sion.
Here. Thank you for coming to this meeting of the Anderson Township Board of Zoning Appeals. Please be aware that this meeting is audio and videotaped and may be carried live on television. First, I'll outline our procedures. A summary of the appeal is presented by the staff, then the appellant will present its case. Board members may then ask questions of the appellant. After that, all persons supporting the appeal will be permitted to testify one at a time after being recognized by the chairman. When those persons supporting the appeal are finished, those opposed to the appeal will then be permitted to testify and/or ask questions of the board after being recognized by the chairman. All persons wishing to testify, whether for or against an appeal, may only do so after being sworn in. When testifying, each person must come forward to the podium after being recognized, speak into the microphone, state their name, address, and any affiliation to the case. All persons testifying will be limited to 4 minutes unless a board member requests additional time. All testimony is given to the board only. No comments or questions are to be directed to the appellant or anyone else in the audience. The board will only hear new, non-repetitive evidence or questions. Should someone wish to show support of previous testimony, they may do so by following the testimony procedures and stating their support of previous testimony. Now, will all persons who may give testimony this evening please stand? Raise your right hand. Do you swear or you got everybody? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Are there any changes to tonight's agenda?
There are none.
Nope.
Do we have any changes to the meeting minutes from last month?
I went through them. I don't have any.
I don't either.
I move, Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the March 7th, 2019 Anderson Township Board of Zoning Appeals minutes.
And just step back 1 minute. We need to get a motion to approve the agenda as well, too.
Oh,
I move that we approve the agenda as established.
second.
We have a motion and a second. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Mr. Nye,
Aye.
Mr. Haber,
Aye.
Mr. Halpin,
Aye.
Mr. Nasilevich,
Aye.
Mr. Sion.
Aye. Sorry, Mr. Haber. You can...
No worries. Now, Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve our minutes from our March 7th, 2019 meeting.
Second.
As published.
We have a motion and a second. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Mr. Nye,
Aye.
Mr. Haber,
Aye.
Mr. Halpin,
Aye.
Mr. Nasilevich,
Aye.
Mr. Sion.
Abstain. With that, we will continue case 5-2019 BZA from last month. That was a meeting I was not in attendance for. I've reviewed the documents and am comfortable sitting in and making a decision on this case. Will the staff please read the summary for the case?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so these are our standards to be considered when granting a variance. So our first case tonight is a continuation of last month. It's case 5, 2019 BZA. The applicant is Daryl Myrinke on behalf of Anderson Township Historical Society. The request is for a conditional use request and for also a variance request, and it's for an urban farm, which we considered as a cultural facility under our conditional use standards. And the location is 2560 Bartles Road, and the zoning is A residence. So this is a property map. You can see this is a conglomeration of properties that the farm is proposed to be on. And one thing we briefly mentioned at the last meeting, and we'll talk about it in a little bit here, is staff would like to see these two parcels here not included in the conditional use permit, and the reason for that will be explained a little later with the recommended conditions. This is an aerial map of the site. You can see here there are a few buildings that are proposed to stay, and So this is a topography map. You can see there is sort of a ravine that goes through the property, and there's also a creek on the property, a stream. This is the site plan that was submitted on March 18th, and so this site plan that was submitted, still are having a little bit of trouble scaling it. Based on, I think that the plan is scalable, but when we scale it out, the numbers that are on the plan don't match up with what the plan scales to, and some of those measurements read a little bit differently when we measure online in Cages. So while it's, I mean, we think it's close to being scaled and able to be scalable, some of the numbers are kind of conflicting with what staff feels it actually measures out when we use a scale. So we, I think, are going to request that a new site plan be submitted. And again, we would like to see these two parcels not included in that site plan, and I'll cover that more with the recommended conditions. So now I'll go through a couple of the pictures of the site. This is looking at the property. You can see this is the driveway, and a portion of that driveway is paved going up onto the property. This is along Bartles Road. This is a sidewalk that was installed a few years ago, and then a retaining wall there up at the frontage on Bartles. This is a picture standing from Bartles Road looking onto the property. Again, another picture of the driveway. This is a picture of a couple of the buildings on the site and some of the clearing that's been done already. This picture is looking north towards Mercer Elementary and Turpin High School. This is a picture of where the garden plots are proposed to be. Again, looking north towards the Mercer Elementary and Turpin High School. I think this specific picture was where a compost pile was proposed, and that has been removed from the site plan. Just got some more pictures here. This is a barn that's on the site that is proposed to remain. And then this is just some clearing that's been done on the site, another one of the structures. So at the last meeting, it was requested that staff would like a new site plan that was able to be scaled. I mentioned some of the issues with the scalable of the plan itself that was submitted. And so these are a couple of other things that were submitted at the last meeting that staff requested additional time to review. So the first of those is the shared parking agreement with the Knights of Columbus. So after further review of that parking agreement, staff determined that the parking lot that's referenced in the agreement is a gravel lot and zoning certificate. There's a few zoning certificates that we have here. Z 2016-329 and Z 2017-52. And these zoning certificates state that the gravel parking area is to be returned to its natural state after the Turpin High School construction. So basically, that gravel lot across the street on the Knights of Columbus property is not a permitted parking lot. It was only permitted to be temporary, and it was for construction at Turpin High School and for workers to be parked there, and then I think also students. And so that construction has now ended, and so per the zoning certificates, it actually needs to go back to its natural state. So staff is requesting, well, I'll talk about this in the next slide when we get to recommended conditions, but staff is requesting a shared parking agreement and a permitted parking lot. The emergency response plan was also submitted at the last meeting, and staff had no issues with that. That was put together with Anderson Township Fire and Rescue, and so that is in compliance. And then, as I mentioned, the site plan, we were still having some issues with the scalability of it. So these are our recommended conditions, and I'll go ahead and read them. But first, staff recommends approval of the conditional use permit based on these following recommended conditions. So the first is that a scaled site plan shall be submitted showing the measurements of the proposed additions as well as the distances from the property lines. And when we say additions here, we just mean the additions to the property, not in addition to any of the buildings or anything like that. That's just new structures going on the site. The second recommended condition is that the parcels that include the Miller Luger Log House and the Brick House, which is the Historical Society's main office, shall not be included as part of the conditional use permit, and we've given the parcel numbers for each of those. And the reason staff feels that those two parcels shouldn't be part of the conditional use permit is if it were to be part of the conditional use, that would just be extra conditions that would be placed on those two parcels. And per the site plan, there are no actual changes happening on those two properties. So staff feels that the only sites that need the conditional use are the sites where actual additions are going to be going. And so we feel that those two parcels with the log house and the brick house should not be included. A site plan with a vehicular area in compliance with Article 5.3D3 of the Anderson Township zoning resolution shall be submitted. And to achieve this, parking should only be shown on one side of the parking lot to meet the parking standards of 9 by 19 parking stalls with a 24-foot wide drive aisle. So basically, staff is just requesting that parking spots on one side of the one side of the parking lot be removed, and the spots on the other side get enlarged to be 9 by 19 with the 24-foot drive aisle, and then that would put that parking lot into compliance as far as just the dimensions of it. A shared parking agreement with either the Knights of Columbus or Forest Hills School District and a permitted parking lot shall be submitted. So this would be different than the gravel parking lot that is currently part of the parking agreement. And then the last condition is that a parking area shall be paved within 5 years of this approval of the conditional use. So with that, I'll go through the staff findings for the specific criteria that pertain to a cultural facility and the conditional use for a cultural facility. So these are the different facilities that are included in that cultural facility, and we kind of used standards from each of them, so I'll go through those now. A lot of these they were in compliance with at the last meeting, so I'm only going to talk about the ones that are not in compliance. So A here, they're compliant with. This next one is no structure, storage area, or vehicular use area shall be located closer than 100 feet to a residential use or district. And so with removing those two parcels that include the log house and the Historical Society's office, that would actually put the bees/pollinator area potentially within 100 feet of the eastern property line, although the adjacent property would obviously still be owned by the Historical Society, so we don't see any issues with that. And then these next two have to do with setbacks. The first one is for the parking area and any let's see here, any buildings. And so while the site plan, we didn't exactly figure out the scaling on it, we were able to determine based off of CAGIS measurements that there will be no buildings or structures within 50 feet of the so then G, they're in compliance with, and then H, the vehicular use area shall be located and designed so as to minimize the impact on the neighborhood. The location of the parking area is elevated and set back over 50 feet from the right-of-way along Bartles Road. However, the gravel parking area, gravel driveway width, and configuration dimensions of the parking area do not comply with Article 5.3 of the zoning resolution, and the applicant is working towards locating parking off-site at neighboring properties. These next two, they were both in compliance with. And then these are all standards that they are in compliance with as well. An emergency plan was submitted, so that was new since the last meeting. And then these are our parking standards. And this just gets back to the 9 by 19 stalls, and this is the one. These are all our standards in our zoning resolution that the previous plan they submitted were not in compliance with. So the plan currently shows 9 by 18 parking spots, and we need the plan to show 9 by 19 spots. And so to achieve that, as I mentioned earlier, the parking should be shown on only one side to meet the parking standards of 9 by 19 in a 24-foot drive aisle. And then the applicant is still proposing a gravel parking lot and driveway, and so that will require a variance approval. So this is staff findings for the conditional, these are just additional conditional use standards, and we feel that they were in compliance with all of these as well. So that gets to the variance then, and staff recommend the variance for the gravel parking area, and staff recommends approval of the variance for the gravel parking area for the following reasons. The first is that staff feels that the variance is not substantial. If the parking area is reconfigured so that 9 by 19 parking spaces are only shown on one side of the parking area with a 24-foot wide drive aisle, it would comply with township zoning regulations. While the proposed surface is gravel, the apron of the driveway is paved concrete and goes approximately 35 feet into the property, eliminating the potential spillover of gravel onto Bartles Road. And then additionally, the project is intended to demonstrate a working farm, and the gravel lot will preserve the natural feel of the farm. So the second is the essential character of the neighborhood would not be altered, and adjoining property owners would not suffer a substantial detriment as a result of the variance for a gravel parking lot. Forest Hill School District, which is adjacent to the north, has expressed interest in participating in the urban farm and potentially sharing off-site parking to limit the use of the gravel parking area. The variance would not adversely affect the delivery of governmental services. The variance can feasibly be obviated by paving the parking lot instead of using gravel, although there should be limited use of the gravel area due to off-site parking. The spirit and intent behind the zoning resolution would be observed, and substantial justice would be done by granting the variance based on the nature of the conditional use as an urban farm. So again, these are all the standards to be considered with the conditional use criteria. These are the standards to be considered also with associated with the special zoning certificate and conditional use. Thank you. And these are the standards to be considered with granting a variance. So again, these are our recommended conditions. I covered those earlier. So, and then this is just demonstrating the two parcels that we would not include in the permit. So with that, I can answer any questions. I know that was a lot, but.
I do have a question about, one of the things you said is the applicant's still proposing gravel driving lots that requires a variance. Are we here to grant that variance today, or are we just here on the conditional use permit issue?
For both.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
And the recommended condition is we grant the variance, but the variance is only good for 5 years, essentially.
Essentially, yes.
Got it.
Any further questions of staff?
I want to follow on what Mr. Nye just said, in that in the memorandum that you sent the board regarding the conditional use request, you say number 5, the parking area shall be paved within 5 years of the approval of the conditional use. And I was interested in why that is a condition.
We felt that,
Why you're allowing that condition.
yeah, we felt that hopefully with, hopefully the farm is a success, and, you know, they have, they get all their garden plots rented out, and so that eventually, later on down the line, it would be feasible to hopefully pave a gravel lot with the success of the farm. And so we felt that should it still be there 5 years from now, it would be best if it were to be paved, if it would continue to be a conditional use.
Okay. My second question is, and I understand at our last meeting, we requested a scalable drawing, and notwithstanding having received that, the dimension that we're looking at between a new structure or use on the property and an adjacent property line is 50 feet. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, cool. Thank you. I'm good.
Any other questions of staff? Seeing none, will the appellant please step forward?
I don't see Daryl Myrinky in the audience, but Don Perry from the Historical Society is here.
Thank you.
My name's Don Perry, 2073 Wolfangle, and I am Vice President of the Historical Society. Daryl had a family situation out of town, and I expect he's still an hour away, so I apologize for that.
Okay, that's quite okay. Thank you. Did you have any additional testimony to present?
No, I have just one question. You asked for a revised site plan, and I apologize for the confusion there. It's being done by someone other than an engineer. When would you need to have that site plan?
Yeah.
So basically, we can't issue the zoning certificate without a site
Okay.
plan. So it's on your time frame, but staff wouldn't be able to issue a zoning certificate without it.
But staff can issue it when you're,
If the board approves it,
gotcha,
then staff.
okay. As I say, we think it's a great community operation. I think the gravel parking lot's a big deal. The other question I have for staff is part of the KFC parking lot permitted?
The part that's currently paved is permitted.
It is permitted?
Yes,
So all we have to do is get the agreement.
in the paved parking lot as opposed to the gravel lot.
Fantastic. Okay.
And if it's, or with the Forest Hill School District at one of those two schools,
Okay.
potentially.
That ought to be tricky. Thank you.
Any questions for the appellant from the board? Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Does anyone else wish to speak in favor of this appeal? Seeing none, does anyone wish to speak in opposition of this appeal? Seeing none, does the board have any final questions, thoughts, ready to close the hearing?
So we would be voting on a revised site plan.
Conditional, yeah, it would be,
So we're okay to vote, and you guys will get,
Yes,
gotcha. Okay, that's it.
if the board feels comfortable with that.
do you want to vote currently, hear the next case?
I think typically we hear all the cases and then discuss them all, which
That's up to the board too.
is not usually how I would do it.
If you're ready, if we're ready to discuss right now,
I'm good to close the public hearing. You need a motion on that?
please.
Mr. Chairman, regarding case 5-2019 BZA, I move that we close the public hearing portion of our meeting regarding this case.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
Second it.
We have a motion and a second. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Mr. Nye? Mr. Haber?
Aye.
Mr. Halpin?
Aye.
Mr. Nasilevich?
Aye.
Mr. Sion?
Aye. And with that, the public hearing is closed. Did you wish to deliberate now, or would you prefer to consider the next case?
Get it over with. Sorry.
Get
Would
it.
you like to start us off, Mr. Halpin?
I think as long as they live up to the expectations of staff, that we should go ahead and approve it. I think it's good for the community. It's helpful with regard to what it can do as far as educating the students at the high school and at the elementary school. And they've got cooperation from the Knights of Columbus across the street. And I say it's a worthwhile project that we should allow them to get in gear and get it done.
I agree with all that. I think while I would hesitate not to adopt all the staff's recommendations, I think the gravel parking lot issue is a problem for them. And we heard last time, they just don't have the money to pave it. They don't have the money to make it bigger. I'd hesitate to impose that condition on them. And I think I would probably propose a condition that so long as it's used as described in this plan, that they could keep it as a gravel lot.
Mr. Bowers, can you go back to the slide where staff recommendations? So let me address these if I may. And I was a proponent at our last meeting to request a scalable drawing from the appellant, and I'm seeing that we don't necessarily have that in front of us today. And that's why I asked the question before, is what's the dimension that we're looking for of structures adjacent to or next to adjacent property lines, and we talked about 50 feet. And as I understand it, from the drawing that we have, the only issue is going to be, and I think what you said, Mr. Bowers, with that number 17 on the site plan, the bees and pollinators, if we agree to take out those two parcels that you recommended before, that was the only use on the property that might be closer than 50 feet. So I'm inclined to agree to the site plan, but I can also be inclined to ask for that scalable site plan. However, I would request that the 50 feet dimension is going to go to the edge of the garden, the urban garden property. So it would include those two parcels that we are excluding from the conditional use request, which I think is appropriate given your testimony before. So I think where I am is I'd like to see that scaled site plan. It's going to be up to staff to review it and include those two parcels that we are not including in the conditional use request as including in the dimension. And I think if we're close here, I mean, the closest one's 121 feet or something like that, that we ought to, the dimensions ought to satisfy. Item number 2 here shall not be included, those two parcels should not be included in the conditional use permit. I agree with that. And again, per your testimony, that we do not encumber those two parcels in addition to the conditional use request. I'm going to jump down to a shared parking agreement number 4. And as I see here that says, please accept this letter as permission for the Historical Society to use the Knights of Columbus upper lot where the students from Turpin park for school. And then it says, if the paved lot is not in use by the Knights, it could also be used, meaning that you have permission to use that. If you contact Matt Smith, number and so on, he can tell you if the lower lot is available. So I don't think we're requiring a dedicated parking lot to be set aside. However, we have an agreement here that says if that lot is not in use by the Knights, that it could be used, meaning somebody's going to have to coordinate it. And I'm fine with coordinating it, that when the Knights aren't using it, that the urban garden can use it. So I consider this to be an agreement that satisfies the needs of what we're saying here in number 4. Then let me finally go to vehicular access and parking. Several years ago, at another urban area within the township located over at close to State and Nagel, we had a similar use where there was a large parcel and it was being used as a rural, more farm application. I do not know what the dimension of the pavement from the street into the property, in my recollection, was 30, 35 feet or something like that. And from that point on is we granted a variance to allow a gravel driveway. And it was going back to the house and back to the barn and whatnot. So I am in agreement that they leave this parking area gravelled, and that number 5 here becomes moot, that we do not request them to pave that area as a part of the conditional use. We've granted it elsewhere, and a precedent has been set. And I believe that we ought to allow the gravel to be, to remain. And I think then when it comes to number 3, regarding parking stalls and paving and striping and all that kind of stuff, is I'm okay with what they're showing. I would imagine that parking in a gravel lot is gonna be maybe a little bit more haphazard than identified stalls with striping and all that kind of stuff. So I'm okay with where they are regarding their gravel parking and dimensions and drive aisles and all that. So number 1, I'm going to leave that up to staff. I do want them to submit a scalable site plan. I'm in agreement with number 2. Number 4, I think they've got an agreement with the Knights of Columbus. Number 5, we're going to allow them to leave the gravel driveway. Once they get it installed, keep it nice and all that. But I'm not a big proponent of, especially in rural areas, that we have to pave parking. We have done such a tremendous job paving everything in this. I won't get political here. We've caused a lot of problems regarding water runoff and stormwater, whatever. And enough said. So again, number 3, regarding their site plan, throw some, I can't say that, throw some gravel down and have some parking. And then regarding the variance regarding the paving, let me make sure I'm doing what I should do here. Regarding the variance, which I believe is of the paving, as I would vote for that. I'm in agreement with leaving it gravel. We have precedent.
I do recall the case, Mr. Haber, you're referring to, that the State and Nagel one. There was, I think it was the change in the house style, and then one of the things under consideration was that as part of that, they were required to put in a paved drive, but apparently they weren't aware of that. There's some change in the site plan too, I believe, so.
Right, right. And what it does is it paves it enough so that any of the gravel doesn't venture down into the roadway.
In which case, based on pictures, they do have that.
They do have that, yeah.
Any other comments from the board? Anybody wish to make a motion?
Just to clarify, Mr. Haber,
Yes.
are you saying then that you want to keep the first 2 conditions, and the 5th condition we said I think was moot? The 4th one, we agreed that they have a parking agreement already. And then the 3rd one, did we want to not include that one as well? Okay,
No,
okay, just clarifying.
no, thank you.
So you're saying let's approve subject to conditions 1, 2, and 4, acknowledging that 4 is satisfied. That's essentially your position, right?
Yes.
Okay. I so move.
I'll second.
A motion to second. Any amendments?
Well, I think we need to,
Caveat the plan, not the dates.
yeah, we need to reference the plan. I've got one here, drawings dated March 18th. I think we need to include the Knights of Columbus letter, which I have here as March 7th. We've got the disaster plan, that was March 7th. um, um, timing, started within 1 year and completed within 2. Is there anything else I'm missing?
I think that was it.
That's it? We have a second? Yep.
You're fine with those amendments? Mr.
Yeah.
Hoffman? Okay. We have a motion and we have a second. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Mr. Nye?
Aye.
Mr. Haber?
Aye.
Mr. Halpin?
Aye.
Mr. Nasalevich?
Aye.
Mr. Sion?
Aye. And with that, this case will be journalized and decided later on, and once the site plan is submitted, that's when the actual certificate will be issued. We will move on to case number 6-2019 BZA. Will staff please read the report?
So, our,
At the staff, if you don't want to.
do we want to reset for a second? Okay, so our second case tonight is, actually, the second case is going to be presented by our Township Co-op, Sam Hoffman.
Okay, case number 6, 2019 BZA. The applicant is David Bodie, the property owner. The location is at 7706 Anderson Oaks Drive, Book 500, page 201, parcel 308. Current zoning is C residence. The request is for a variance to allow an existing accessory structure to remain in the front yard area where it is only permitted in the rear yard per Article 5.2A7 of the Anderson Township zoning resolution. So a little bit of history. Zoning certificates were issued in 2006 for a 6-foot-high wooden privacy fence, which was later replaced in 2009 for a 4-foot-high split rail fence, and then replaced once again in 2018 with the existing 4-foot-high split rail fence. Or I'm sorry, it was replaced with another 6-foot-high privacy fence in the rear yard. On January 22nd, 2019, the Anderson Township Planning and Zoning Department received a complaint on this property regarding the split rail fence being removed and the new 6-foot privacy fence being installed, in addition to a shed being located in the front yard. In the letter that was submitted as part of the application, the applicant stated that the shed has been in place for approximately 9 years. So in addition, the new fence that was included is compliant and it's permitted. So here's the property map. It is a corner lot. If you wanna, here's the aerial map. Topography, it's pretty flat. Here is looking north towards the property. If you look to the right, you can see the shed. This is looking more towards the shed on Burr Oak at the corner. And then further into their property, this is just a better view of the shed and the existing fence. This is looking from the adjacent property to the north, just from their view from their driveway towards the shed and the screening and fence. And then this is the current screening along Burr Oak Drive, where the shed is. And there is a small opening between the screening, so you can see the shed from Burr Oak. Staff is of the opinion that the variance could be substantial due to its proximity at the street, although it is heavily screened by large pine trees, which are to remain. The essential character of the neighborhood would not be altered, and adjoining properties would not suffer a substantial detriment as a result of the variance, due to the fact that it is heavily screened from Burr Oak Drive, and it has existed for approximately 9 years. The variance would not adversely affect the delivery of governmental services. The owner's predicament can be feasibly obviated through some method other than a variance. The existing structure could be moved to the rear yard where it is permitted. per our zoning resolution, although it would require the property owner to deconstruct the permitted 6-foot privacy fence that was recently completed in order to move the shed into the rear yard and then reconstruct it. Staff is of the opinion that the spirit and intent behind the zoning requirement could be observed by granting the variance, based on the shed being heavily screened by the trees, and its existence of 9 years. So here are the standards to be considered for this variance. Yep. Mhm. I believe that's it.
So the existing accessory structure has been there approximately 9 years without complaint.
But according to the letter from the applicant.
Okay.
And
And the privacy fence was constructed under permit? So a zoning certificate was granted
yes,
for that. And when was that?
it was in 2018.
2018? Okay.
You can see that fence in the background of this picture here.
Right.
And that is only in the rear yard. It's a 6-foot privacy fence.
Okay. Thank you.
Any more questions from the board, staff? Yep, with that, will the appellant or the appellant's representative, please step forward, speak into the microphone, state your name, address, and any affiliation to the present appeal.
I'm a homeowner. My name is David Bodie, and I live at 7706 Anderson Oaks Drive.
Thank you.
I just wanted to make one additional comment when you were asking about when the new privacy fence was constructed. It was actually constructed in December of 2018, just prior to the complaint in January of 2019. And so I just wanted to have a short statement, if I could. I'm here tonight to request a variance at my residence for an existing shed that has been in place for several years. I did not know until recently that the township considers this area behind my house part of my front yard. I've always treated it as my backyard and even enclosed it with a split rail fence shortly after moving in. The area around the shed is heavily screened with evergreens and have been in place for years, so I believe the essential character of the neighborhood would not be altered by granting this variance. Likewise, the spirit and intent behind the zoning requirement would be observed. While I could move the shed, there would be a potentially significant cost in doing so, including removing part of the privacy fence that was recently installed. I just ask that you take these factors into consideration when making your decision. Thank you.
Any questions of the appellant?
So you moved in 2009?
Yeah.
Okay. And so the shed was there when you moved in?
No, I put it up. I want to. It's been so long. I want to say it was about a year after I moved in. I believe.
Okay. No, you didn't have any complaints at that time?
No.
And so the split rail fence that used to be there, did it come from the corner of the house right to the front of the picture there and then go along the side?
Yeah, you can kind of even see the outline there.
Yeah.
That's where the split rail was.
And were the trees inside the split?
They were inside the split rail, yes.
Can you show us the picture, maybe one in either direction, I think? Yeah, this one. And did the split rail come back to this corner here too?
So the split rail parallel or went along the same line as the back of the current fence.
Yeah.
So it went all along here.
Is this tree in the front left corner on your property or a neighbor's property?
This tree right here, that's my neighbor's property.
Okay.
And this, to be clear, this view is actually looking from the neighbor's property.
Neighbor's driveway.
Yeah.
Would it make sense that another piece of screening, like a tree or something, be placed in that spot where the split rail fence used to be?
Sure, I would have no issue doing that.
Okay.
That's what I was thinking.
We'll try to give it more screening. I have no more questions.
No more questions for the appellant? Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
In your letter, you mentioned dogs getting out. Is that the reason for your?
Yes, so the split rail fence, I have dogs, and it happens. Neighbors' dogs get loose. They approach my property, and the dogs start to go at it, right? And so this has happened several times over the years, and the last incident, which was actually in 2018, right before I made this decision, I had to, one of my dogs got significantly injured, and, we don't really know how it happened. They're in a fervor, and they're running against the fence and whatnot, but it was a significant expense, and, I don't blame any of the neighbors. Dogs get out sometimes, right? So I felt like this was the only way that I could really remedy that situation, was to just eliminate that, that view for, any animal that might be loose in the neighborhood.
Thank you.
And the reason you didn't put the fence all the way to the other side of the shed was because of the trees, and it wouldn't look good anyway.
No, according to zoning, you can't put a 6-foot privacy fence
On the front yard.
except behind the house,
Yeah,
right?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I forget. That's right, that's not the backyard.
Well, but I don't,
It's a corner lot.
but I don't know that that actually matters, does it? If it's just, you can only put a 6-foot privacy fence behind any house, right?
A 6-foot privacy fence has to be located in the rear yard, so that, if it were to be any further towards the street, it would be considered the front yard. That's why the fence was restricted to where it is now.
So you have an L-shaped front yard.
Yeah.
Correct.
2 front yards.
Yeah, exactly, and that's news to me.
Any further questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to speak in favor of this appeal? Were you sworn in, ma'am?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ruth Hardy. I live at 7757 Anderson Oaks. So I'm in that Anderson Oaks subdivision. It's a very nice place to live. People keep up their homes nicely, and the Bodie home is conforming in that respect. It's also conforming with respect to the shed, because it is so well screened by those evergreens, which are in great condition. I never even noticed the shed until this came up, because it's so well screened. The other point I wanted to make is that on the other cul-de-sac, the Great Oaks, which is sort of parallel in that subdivision, the corner house that's in the same place this one is also has a shed. The only difference being is that that house faces the actual cul-de-sac. It faces Great Oak. But their shed is very obvious from Anderson Oaks. In fact, there are 2 sheds in very close proximity that, everybody can see it. They're not screened at all, but no one seems to, that doesn't seem to have bothered anyone up until now. So I just wanted to say that we think they should be able to keep the shed. I don't see that it is detrimental to the character of the subdivision. Thank you.
Any questions of this appellant?
Nope.
Does anyone else wish to speak in favor of this appeal? You didn't, you said? Yeah.
Did not.
You raise your right hand.
Yep.
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Latasha Riley, 1379 Washington Circle. From this view, the house across the street, just south, I'm on the other side. So my backyard, I'm not lucky enough to have a fence. So I walk my dog on the leash in my backyard and can see this gentleman's property every time I walk my dog, and I appreciate the fence. I don't think there's anything wrong with this property the way it is. I am known on Washington for chasing dogs and calling the sheriff to help me find their home. So I don't know my neighbors. I don't know who complained, but I think it's pretty ridiculous, and I'm here just to support, because I don't think anything's wrong with it at all.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak in favor of this appeal? Sir?
My name is Mike Hardy, and I live at 7757 Anderson Oaks Drive, just down the street. And I just wanted to say one thing that, like my wife, I never even noticed that shed until we saw the zoning notice go up. And I think the owner has done a good job of using greenery to screen it. And the other thing that I would like to comment on was I didn't have the opportunity to see the shed from the neighbor's perspective, and I tend to agree that maybe an additional green evergreen there would be an enhancement of the neighborhood and maybe appease the neighbor from any offending view. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the individual? Thank you, sir. Does anyone else wish to speak in favor of this appeal? Seeing none, does anyone wish to speak in opposition to this appeal? Seeing none, is the board ready to close the public hearing on this case?
Yep.
Can we get a motion, please?
I move to close the public hearing on this case.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Mr. Nye?
Aye.
Mr. Haber?
Aye.
Mr. Halpin?
Aye.
Mr. Nasilevich?
Aye.
Mr. Sion?
Aye. And with that, does anybody wish to start us off on the deliberations for this case?
I-
Go ahead. Please, John.
Okay. I just think that maybe a additional greenery might be helpful. Other than that, it's been there for 9 years. Don't know the motivation behind why a complaint was made, although it was still, I think you could still see it with a split rail fence, 4-foot split rail fence. So I guess privacy fence that got it going. So in any case, screen it, and I think that gets the job done.
Well, thank you, Mr. Halpin, and I'm going to recommend that we approve the variance request without any additions for a couple reasons. Number one is I don't know who's complaining, and if that person chooses not to show here, then I understand that we've been made aware of a non-complying accessory structure, but the structure's been there for 9 years without complaint, and only because of a fence did somebody say, oh, there's an accessory structure here. So I don't know how to even advise the appellant or help the appellant understand where you would put an evergreen. There was that other shot, Mr. Bowers, if you would go back, that there's that one little, that one right there. You could put a piece of greenery there, I guess, but that's been that way for a long time too. So I am of the opinion to grant the variance request without any additional requirements on behalf of the appellant.
I'll second that.
Well, I didn't make a motion. I mean, we just don't have,
We don't know which neighbor complained.
I don't know what, yeah, exactly,
And what the deal is.
yeah.
Okay.
And I would appreciate it had the person who submitted the complaint be here so we could have a better understanding of their concerns, and we may be able to
Mitigate.
Alleviate.
mitigate, whatever. So, yeah, I'm for granting the variance without any conditional, without any additional conditions on behalf of the appellant.
I'll play devil's advocate and, advocate for the neighbor who may not have made the complaint, but I think, the reason that corner lots have 2 front yards is because from the neighbors on Burr Oak, it's not this shot, but the one around the corner, it does look like the front yard. And so I think some additional screening from their perspective, even if they weren't the ones who complained, would be appropriate. I mean, especially when we consider that this is a variance that runs with the land. The people who live there now may not care, but someone else might live there someday, and that is their front yard, or their neighbor's front yard, for all intents and purposes. I think it's reasonable to impose a condition of a little extra screening from the perspective of that neighbor's driveway.
I think this is a tough one because I think, just like the staff commented, we are potentially setting a precedent for that neighborhood for other neighbors to request variances of such types. But I think this is a unique case, being that the shed has been there for so long. I could go either way on the screening. And it sounds like the appellant was okay with adding a little bit of screening, so I would be in agreement that maybe something wouldn't hurt.
I mean, even if we don't impose the condition, the appellant can always put in the screening and maybe keep the neighbors happy.
But
Yeah.
I am in favor.
I would concur.
You are in favor of?
The variance, passing the variance. Either way on the screening.
Either way, okay.
Yeah, I would concur with, I understand Mr. Nasilovich's sentiment about other neighbors wanting the same type of thing, but this house is unique, as we mentioned, it's the L front yard, 2 front yards, so just by the virtue of, being on, having their side yard on a road, on a drive over there, that causes an issue, but same time too, it's been there for a while, the screening, yeah, theoretically, we could request screening go put up on that side and put up over there, and then tomorrow he could go cut the entire other screening down, and so to me, it's kind of, moot, irrelevant. I would
Well,
be,
maybe we ought to then impose a condition that they maintain the existing screening.
and then, that
Maybe we're
beyond
meddling
my
too much.
scope, though, I mean, what, somebody, a neighbor squirts Roundup on one of the trees, and then, who do we blame there? I think we're getting a little too far, and this is already kind of a unique situation as it is, but, my personal opinion, and, not trying to impose on anybody else, but yeah, I don't see the value of having a screening condition, considering the fact that, if they want to go cut down all the trees, then there's nothing stopping them from doing that. With that being said, somebody care to venture a motion?
Well, I move that we approve the request for variance based on the recommendations of staff.
Against the recommendations of staff. Because they're of the opinion, right? That it could be substantial. We did. Against.
That's how the staff report was
Against
written.
the recommendation.
Against the recommendation of staff.
I second.
How about
With
we,
substantial conformance to the plans submitted on, with substantial the conditions that are a part of every,
Oh, it was,
the dates?
it's just to be constructed within a year.
So the condition, you usually put 2 conditions on every
right,
case.
1 year
So-
and 2 years.
So we don't need that one,
No,
because
you
it's
don't.
already built.
Right.
But we do need substantial conformance with the plan submitted on March 14th.
With
2019.
substantial conformance to plans submitted on
Thank
March
you.
14th.
Sorry for the confusion there.
Heard a motion, do we have a second? Any,
Yeah, I thought there was a second.
It was.
did you, any further comments?
So as I understand it, the motion is to grant the variance without any additional landscaping conditions.
Yes,
Mhm.
correct.
Okay?
Any other discussion? With that, we have a motion and a second. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Mr. Nye,
I'm going to vote against this, though, with half-heartedly, I vote
Okay.
no, because I would have imposed the additional condition that I mentioned.
okay. Mr. Haber,
Aye.
Mr. Halpin,
Aye.
Mr. Nasalevich,
Aye.
Mr. Sion.
Aye. With that, we will go into recess.
Yeah, let's go to recess. Good job.
Well, I thought once,
Yeah. I think that's what it was.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
probably right.
I know it's right. She came over and accosted my daughter-in-law at her front door about how bad it was.
Who was it?
Neighbor behind there where the picture was.
Right next door?
Yeah, it wasn't, it was never the shed. It was
Yeah,
always
it's the fence.
Yeah.
Oh, what can you do?
Cost Mr. Brody,
ridiculous.
what's an appeal these days?
Probably could have put a little
200
wave
bucks,
on the top of the
300
fence.
bucks?
Put a little
the-
wave on
what's
the
it
top of
cost?
the fence, and it probably wouldn't have gotten a complaint.
Hang a bird feeder on?
So, she got what she wanted, she cost him $250.
Yeah.
there's one in every neighborhood.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Well, like I said, this cost $250.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Okay.
John, did I see you at Coffee Emporium last week?
You probably did.
Like, I saw you, and then, like, there was, like, some recognition, but, like, in a different context. Like, I could not figure out who the heck you were
Yeah.
until I had driven away, and I was like, oh, I
That's
know
right.
who
That's who
was.
that guy is.
Yeah.
I go there every day.
Do you?
Yeah.
Which one?
The one on Hyde Park, East Hyde Park, there, across from the police department. Yeah? Yeah, yeah. I like their, I was
You ready to get back?
settled on them compared to the rest. Mount Lookout wasn't there,
Yeah.
Lockland wasn't there.
Yeah.
I don't care for Starbucks, so
Mhm.
those are the best.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned.
Yep, agree.
Excuse me, we're going to go back into session. Thank you.
Thank you. We are back in session.
And you guys are fast.
Let me know when you're ready to go down.
So that's just the one parcel now, or is this,
Yes, this is fixed.
okay.
So, just a matter of organization, you've got the conditional use request here, and then later on, there's the variance request?
Oh, no, it should say in the request for a conditional.
I mean, I figured you might do it in two different sections.
I did split it further down, but up here it should be combined. We check the parcels. And then Brad's gonna check the parcels for us real quick.
So the parcels 32, 41, 51, and 45 are just the four. We're checking.
Yes, because I think the other two parcels are 264 and 269
Okay.
that are on your agenda.
So fourth line at the end, to allow the property to be used as a cultural facility?
Urban cultural.
It's cultural facilities, the designation in
You're
the
missing the
zoning
word as, is
resolution.
what he said.
To be used
Oh.
as,
Oh, thank you, sorry.
as a. There.
Yep.
I'm good.
You are.
Yep.
Everybody ready?
I know I say that, it's crazy.
section's the conditional use, and then the bottom section is the variance, and then it'll go into all of the recommended conditions.
You have two number twos. Still got two number twos.
Man.
Word does not always like me.
There's Clippy when you need him.
Okay, the end of paragraph number 1 there, and by bringing the parking area into compliance.
Except,
So I think you just end with, yeah.
And we normally refer to it as spirit and intent rather than intention.
Should the C be capitalized in variance request Article 5.3, 5.3 D,
No.
C,
No,
3
it's
C?
it's a little c.
it's a little c.
Oh, okay.
I'm-
Capital D.
Probably capital C then too.
It's a lot of articles and sub-articles.
It's relegated to the small size.
Yeah, I think so. I'm ready.
Ready?
Yep,
Yep.
same here.
So this needs to,
I threw my 2 cents in there. I spoke for the C.
So yeah, we took out the reconfiguration, right?
yeah, so do we want to get rid of all of this?
I think I'd leave
no.
in the while,
Yeah,
because, right, because the current plan does have the 35-foot
Okay,
whatever, right?
mm-hmm, yeah.
okay. Thank you.
Yeah. That explains it.
Yeah. I'm ready.
Ready?
Yep.
Yep.
So number 4 needs to change.
Yeah.
Do we just want to delete number 4?
I think so.
Sure.
Mr. Bowers, did you were confirming the
Yes.
plot, so we're correct?
Yes, these are the two that were removed from the, up, at the beginning of the resolution.
Okay, then you need to take out number 5.
Right, because I think we determined that it did comply, right?
No, they can coordinate it, yeah.
Yeah.
So we're good there?
Yep.
And then all of this is just our standard
Verbiage.
verbiage.
Okay.
All right?
Mr. Chair, regarding case 5-2019 BZA, I move that we approve and journal our case, our decision.
Second.
We have a motion and a second.
Do you want to?
Secretary, please call the roll.
Mr. Nye?
Aye.
Mr. Haber?
Aye.
Mr. Halpin?
Aye.
Mr. Nasilevich?
Aye.
Mr. Sion?
Aye.
See, now, I don't know who that is. I think that's a robocall.
insurance for you, buddy. You better answer it.
Or they have a credit card that will take care of my problems. Well, I'm glad we got it over with.
You ready to scroll?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Oh, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go back up. There we go. Thank you.
I think we need to fix number 4. Or just delete number 4.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
can delete 4.
Yeah.
I don't think you need number 4.
So just get rid of it?
Yeah.
I think you've got the essence, which is that it's heavily screened and been there for 9 years.
Yep.
Do we want to say anything about neighbors? No neighbors voiced opposition?
No. I think that if that neighbor felt that strongly about, they should have been here.
I mean, that's not really one of the criteria for granting the variance, though.
Right.
I mean, it's either
Fair enough.
substantial or it's not, the essential character is altered or it's not. I mean, I suppose maybe that affects our evaluation of whether the substantial character of the neighborhood is really altered. I have my doubts. But, they don't have to be here, right?
Well, I like to hear, if a person's gonna complain, I like to hear from that complainer.
Yeah. So how do I vote on this? I voted to grant subject to conditions, but this accurately reflects the board's decision. Do I vote aye or nay on this?
I believe you vote yes. But
That's what I'll do.
I think it's up to you.
Who's gonna stop me?
Is this case 6?
This is case 6.
Mr. Chair, regarding case number 6-2019 BZA, I move that we approve and journal our decision.
Second.
We have a motion and second. Secretary, please call the roll.
Mr. Nye,
Aye.
Mr. Haber.
What are you laughing at?
With a weak eye.
Yep.
It was a weak eye. Aye.
Mr. Halpin,
Aye.
Mr. Nasilevich.
Aye.
Mr. Sion.
Aye.
I want to see that reflected in the minutes. That we had 4 ayes and 1 weak eye.
Can we get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
We're adjourned.
You need a second on that, too? Okay, good.
Sit here and debate the aye.